Hey guys, welcome to Finally Clicked, the podcast where we discuss business, leadership, and personal development. My name is Margaret Smith, and I'm the Director of Operations for Pickett Street Properties, a real estate team out of Bothell, Washington. And I'll be here every week with our owner and team leader, Jesse D. Moore. We'll be digging into concepts and ideas that have helped us both personally and professionally. And you'll also get a chance to hear from local and national experts that we know provide massive value to get to the point where it all finally clicks.
Welcome, everyone, to Finally Clicked, hosted by myself, Jesse Moore, and
Margaret Smith.
howdy. Hi, Margaret.
Howdy.
How's it going?
It's great.
You have a bandana on. You look like Rosie the Riveter.
This is my Rosie the Riveter look, an outfit I like to wear about every 2 weeks.
You can, you know it. And she says, do you know what she says?
You can do it.
Doesn't she say you can do it?
I believe that's her.
Which reminds me of Waterboy. Remember in Waterboy?
Waterboy.
You can do it.
Oh my
You can
God.
do it.
It's been a while since I've seen that movie.
Those are very different people. Rosie the Riveter and
Yeah.
Rob Schneider in Waterboy. Just throwing out some references.
Just throw it
today.
out there.
We have an exciting interview today. Not without its challenges. I wish we were in person with him. I
Yeah,
wish
that's always
that
better.
we had more time.
Mm-hmm.
I wish that we had a panel of writers that we could edit these questions down to the most important.
Yeah.
And regardless, we have an awesome interview today with Tyler Schmitt, who is Gary Vaynerchuk's one of Gary Vaynerchuk's assistants.
Yeah.
And
No, it was awesome. It was like a little peek behind the curtain for what we're going to get at the Operations Retreat in a couple weeks. And, when we were talking to him, I mentioned that I first met or heard of Gary through you. Haven't met him yet. And I love Gary's outlook on life. And we talked about that with Tyler today, a little bit about empathy. And the whole idea that he's going to be able to come to the retreat is just awesome because I always talk to admin about thinking outside the box and thinking outside of our environment and learning from people that operate at a much faster and higher level than us in order to help us improve what our small businesses do. And so I think Tyler is really going to help us be able to up our game and give us some perspective on what it's like to schedule someone who schedules in 5 to 15-minute increments. I know for a fact that nobody works for an agent who works like Gary.
right.
So,
Not that we know of yet.
no.
And I would say this, like Tyler, I was a little unsure, like what kind of speaker he would be.
Oh, sure.
Because he seems a little more introverted, seems a little shyer, quieter,
Mm-hmm.
based on my initial impressions. But after this interview, I can see how brilliant he is.
Yeah,
and
he's smart.
He's well spoken.
Mm-hmm.
I know he's newer at the speaking stuff, but I can see where that he'll be successful.
Yeah.
So
No, he's definitely going to add value. Yeah.
it's neat that we have our audience has an opportunity to hear from him now because there's not a lot of information from him out there, but I think you'll be seeing a lot of information coming from him
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
in the future.
Totally.
So, well, let's dive into the interview, and we'll catch you on the flip side for some follow-up. Enjoy.
Hey guys, welcome to Finally Clicked. It's Margaret Smith here with Jesse Moore, and today we have a very special guest, Tyler Schmitt, who I am super excited to introduce. He's going to be coming to the Pacific Northwest Operations Retreat in a couple weeks and agreed to be a part of our podcast, which is just amazing. So we have a whole list of questions from listeners and from some followers on Instagram. But first and foremost, I just want to welcome Tyler and have him tell us a little bit about himself and how he came to be Gary's assistant and where he's at today.
Amazing. Well, thank you both very much for taking the time and having me on here. I'm excited to do this. I'm excited to get out to Seattle, and it's nice. It falls on a Friday. I've never been to Seattle. I've been to Northwest, not fully Northwest, but kind of like Montana area, and spent some good amount of time out of there. So I'm going to stay for Saturday, stay the weekend, and
nice.
go to the city a little bit as well. So I'm excited for that, and thankful for the opportunity, and just want to thank both of you for having me in mind and having me on the show, and ready to get into it. So, in terms of my background and how I ended up where I am today, and it's now been crazy 5.5 years working at Vayner, and it feels like a day, if I'm being honest with you. I was just out at Penn State actually 2 days ago, my alma mater, and it felt like a day ago that I left there, and it's been 6 years time, and it's been a fun journey. I started here at VaynerMedia as an entry level employee, a role called community manager, which is pretty funny because I think a lot of what we were doing then as an agency was dealing in an organic distribution world on a lot of these platforms on Facebook and Twitter, and before kind of the age of paid promotion of content, and before they were charging to get your content in front of eyeballs. And a lot of what we focused on was building the community and the community management of content. And 6 years later, I think that's still the number one, use case of bringing value, and really like not focusing on the width and follower count and size of community, but the depth of the relationships that you're building. And so we still have people doing community management day in and day out. And as everything is rapidly changing with the internet, I think the one thing that is holding true no matter what is it's a place to build real relationships, whether you're me, Tyler Schmitt, or you're a cookie brand or a cereal brand. Now you can actually have a relationship with Captain Crunch and he can speak to you. But if he puts out a piece of content and someone responds back to it, and he doesn't engage in that conversation, that's a negative, not a positive. And so I started off as a community manager, and after about 8 months at Vayner, I got to know Gary and AJ. AJ is his younger brother. He was the chief operating officer at the time. I got to know AJ and those guys playing basketball. I was taking a 4:30 train from New Jersey into the city, just trying to build relationships. And one day, AJ was looking for an assistant. And I come from a hospitality world. I come from working in restaurants my whole life, and that's what I ended up studying at Penn State, was hotel restaurant management. And I still, and like a lot of what I think I'll talk about in Seattle is the service nature of being an admin or an assistant of sorts, and what goes into that, and hospitality and business in general, I think is a big white space, and a place people can attack. But long story short, I got to have the opportunity to be AJ's assistant, and I took that role in just before June of 2014. And so since that day, I've kind of been 24/7, 365 there for AJ and his brother. And after 18 months with AJ was stepping away for a couple different reasons out of the COO role, and took some time off. And I was getting ready to move over to London. We were starting our operation over there. And one night at like 9:30, we were all hanging around the office late, and Gary was still there working away. And he called me into his office and asked me if I would want to be his assistant, off the back of doing it for 18 months. And it was always kind of thought of as, okay, you put your time in as the assistant, and then you'll move on to a bigger, better thing. And for me, that was the London opportunity. And the second the words came out of his mouth, I said yes. And he was like, okay, we'll go home and sleep on it, and think about it a little bit. And so then I woke up the next morning and said yes. The answer is still yes. And so that was 3.5 years ago, and it's been a wild, wild ride since. The first day I walked into VaynerMedia, it was 270 people and 2 offices bi-coastal. And today, I think we're north of 800. We have around 850 people. It's now a holding company, VaynerX, with offices in Singapore, offices in London, Chattanooga, Tennessee, LA, and we've actually got a couple of people on the ground in Denver as well. So there's been, my takeaway has just been immense amount of learnings and understanding of how to navigate business, and how to treat people, I think, and the ROI of actually caring about the relationships that you're building, and not just being in business for transactional purposes, and the long tail of how that all plays out. Is just what keeps me fired up every day.
I think I have my first question for you based on what you just said. So in the background and researching you a little bit before today, I know that Gary asked you for a 3-year commitment,
Yeah.
right? And you just said it's been 3.5 years.
Yeah.
So how long do you see yourself doing this?
It's funny. I get that, I think, a lot, and the answer is I'm not sure. I think we have a really good cadence right now. I have there's a massive team that kind of I sit on top of with Andy Kranak and a couple other guys that have been here for a long time. Team Gary has now grown to 37 people, and that's doing his day-to-day content. So I lean in and help Andy, who really runs that team, on some managerial stuff there. I also have a phenomenal woman that works with me on the kind of executive admin team, Alex Raffington. And so, where we're at now in terms of time wise, although it's been that time, it still feels like day one a lot of times. I tweeted out the other day, like, first day on the job. It was just like something that was going through my head, and everyone's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, no, I didn't go anywhere. It's just kind of a mentality. And so I try not to look too far ahead based on if I told you 4 years ago what's next, like, it wasn't this. And so I think I'm in a position now where I get to see a lot of different opportunity, and one thing that Gary obviously preaches big time is patience. And I think I'll know what's next and how I'm feeling about that when I wake up and I'm not really enjoying what I'm doing. And I've had very open and transparent conversations with Gary about that. Like, yeah, it's been 3 years, kind of what is next. But unless there's a natural progression out of this and like really ripping a band-aid off, because there's just so many deep connections and context that I have that helps the role. Until there's a very natural kind of progression, we're feeling good about it, and I'm not in any sort of rush. And I think that there's something to be said about that. I think in the space of being an admin or working for a leader and for the learnings, I think there's probably two buckets that people fall in: either young and hungry and attached to an executive for the learnings and kind of like they'll almost see it as an MBA and the quantum leap that they'll get from spending the time with that person, or someone that's a career executive admin and may not have that same fire like day in and day out of service. But I think that is a big space that people can improve on or think about differently if they're thinking of more of it as like service and hospitality and as an organization as a whole. um, or the long term of not thinking about just being an admin and learning for 2 years, but instead for 6 or 7, and the upside in that is kind of how I think about things a lot. So my short answer is I'm not sure, but I'm really comfortable in not being sure at the moment. But also completely transparently, like, I do think about it, and if I'm having a day where I'm like, I've been doing this for a long time, me and Gary have had those conversations a couple times, and just feeling in a really good place right now.
So speaking of context, I understand how you mean that when you say that, and I want to get back to that as well. But let's give our audience some context in regards to your role and what your day looks like. Because I know a little bit about Gary Vee and his schedule and his calendar, and it's arduous. It seems arduous to me.
Mm-hmm.
So what's a day look like for you? What time are you expected to be at work? How long are you expected to be there?
Yeah, so I think in terms of that last part, in terms of how long I'm expected to be there, or what time I tend to be at work, I've gotten to a place, and really the first 2 years, 18 months were a challenge in the sense of the way Gary lives his life is, work-life balance, right? And I look at it all as one. So for me, how long am I expected to be at work? I work 24/7, 365, but with the total autonomy of knowing stress limits and when I need to unplug and when I'm not working per se. So if it's 9 o'clock tonight and I'm in a place where I'm okay and need to be working and I have a lot of emails I need to get to, or text messages or Instagram DMs or what have you, I'll do that. But if I feel that I need to unplug or something, if Gary I think on Friday he'll be out of town with the family. They're on spring break. If I need to take that day, like that's something that is not really even spoken about. So it fluctuates a lot. Today I got into work at 8:45, and I'll probably be here till 8:30, and then I'm going to go to do a dinner with Andy and D-Rock and a couple friends of ours, and then I'll probably get home at 11:30, do 30 minutes of kind of email cleanup, look at tomorrow, the schedule wise, and then wake up and I'm playing in a basketball tournament in the morning, and then be right back at it. And then on what the day to day looks like in terms of how I'm spending my time, that can fluctuate a lot as well. It can fluctuate if Gary's in the office versus not in the office. That day looks incredibly different. Gary was here today, and I was joking with the team between 11:30 and 2:30 in the span of that's 3 hours. He took 15 meetings, and so what that looks like in terms of even just managing that, if it's a 7-minute meeting, it's a 5-minute meeting, a 10-minute meeting, but all of a sudden it turns into 20 minutes. And that's where I think a lot of the hospitality comes in. How do you handle the person that's 15 minutes behind, that's been waiting for a month to have that conversation? That's a really impactful one-on-one conversation. They might be resigning, or they might be having an HR problem that's dire, and how do you treat each one of those individuals with the respect that they deserve on an individual level, while also keeping the entire picture intact? And then really leaning into a lot of Gary's relationships. I'm getting nonstop kind of pinged from different angles in terms of people internal and external that need Gary's time. Constantly trying to prioritize that in my mind, and working with Alex in terms of, she's having separate conversations. So making sure that we're on the same page at all time. And if there's a disconnect in what one person might see as it being a certain priority level in Gary's world, in terms of how, if it's not, I need to see Gary tomorrow on Thursday. Okay, well, let me just digest all this. Can we get together Tuesday? That person might feel slighted by that, and helping them contextualize how that's happening. That's part of the job as well. And then there's the whole media and content arm that I've been kind of really, I think, is the next evolution of my role, is what I would say, in the sense that we have built out a publishing business, where we have a female publishing platform, PureWow, and a male publishing platform called 137 PM. And so we're constantly trying to create content for that. So trying to keep a pulse on all things culture, whether it's fashion or fitness, or hip hop, or what's trending in sneakers today, and then routing that back through the team, because I'm able to have such a close lens on what Gary's operating. And so when he's meeting with Bobby Kim, who founded the Hundreds, the street brand, in a vacuum, only Gary knows that. But in a VaynerX world, we build that relationship, and how can we bring value to him, and how can he bring value to us, and piping that through the entire system, is what I would say the next evolution, and what I'm spending a lot of time on as well, if that all kind of is clear and not long-winded.
Totally fine.
Let's go back to the beginning. So when you first start with Gary, I imagine, again, we know his schedule. Like, there's a lot to it. Expectations are high.
Very much so.
How do you learn? How long does it take for you to get the context with Gary?
It takes a long time, and to be honest, I think you've got to learn to navigate. It's like in all relationships, you've got to learn how to connect with people, and understand how they are processing their own day. And so part of my job is extracting context from him, because I get endless amounts of, Gary just met with someone, and he either is going to enter into a business deal with them, or wants to set up a dinner with them in a couple of weeks. And I don't speak to Gary after that meeting, but I get an email from them, or a text, or a phone call, like, we need this. And I need to figure out, okay, the actual context of where that all sits, and Gary is very special in the way that he can really focus in one-on-one, even when he's got a million things going on. And so continuing that over, they come out of those conversations or understanding, the next steps in business. A lot of times I put the onus back on them that these people need to give me context. So I'm gaining a lot of context about Gary from other people that are spending time with him as well, because of his limited nature of time. But then also, it just, the first 18 months that I worked with Gary on a day-to-day basis was not easy from a mental perspective, and from just me as a human perspective. It was a massive, massive change in not only lifestyle, but discipline, and just a big change in how I was spending my time, and questioning myself a lot, because he's someone that has a clear vision on what he wants to accomplish, and he's willing to work for that. And when you're not the top person, you're really following someone else's vision, in some capacity, if you're working within that business. And so I had to not only understand his vision, but if I was going to be so close and such a driver of what he was looking to accomplish, I needed to make sure that I was on board with that as well, and it took a while to mimic my lifestyle towards what he needed in that role, and a lot of times in the beginning, it was me judging his expectations of me versus accepting that he's not putting pressure or forcing anyone to do anything. I think a lot of times he gets taken out of context in that sense, but he's just being very real of like, if you want this role, if you want to be a part of this, this is what it takes. But you walking in here and telling me that you don't want to do it changes nothing between us.
Yeah.
It's just the fact of the matter. And so that took a long time. That took a long time for me. And I speak to a lot of my friends, even still, like a lot of people in my life are aware of that, in terms of just, you've got to cut out a lot of different things, and so there's friends, that I would love to still have the same relationship that I had today, but I don't. And that's kind of, yeah, that's the deal.
It's
Yeah, keep going.
it's funny. You and
Yeah.
I have the same belief. I often,
Yeah.
Margaret and I joke around because I think everything takes about 18 months. Like mastery,
Yeah.
I think if we hire someone new in a position for our
Mm-hmm.
company, to me, we have an 18-month plan for them before they can move on to another position, because I want them to master that role as much as possible. And I think it takes about 18 months for them to get comfortable in that role.
Yeah.
He actually has a class that's about 18. The whole 18-month thing is like, if we could throw that around, that term around, which we do, everything takes about 18 months, according to Jesse. So it's
I think it is fascinating, and expectations, right, from both sides, I think are important. And it's tough because even we're bringing a lot of, young employees onto Team Gary. And that team has gone from 10 people to 35 in the span of 4 or 5 months. And so there's a lot of conversations that we have, me, Andy, David, of evaluating people in the first 2, 3, 5 weeks. But you've really got to almost stop yourself from allowing that to happen, because those people don't. You also got to allow them to understand what your expectations are. And then if they still want to map towards those expectations, I think a lot of people think the hiring process is just, once you hire the person, like, they're hired, it's going to be a great relationship. It hasn't even begun a lot of times. And I think that same is for clients, bringing on clients. I think a lot of times the second people think you signed an SOW, or like the ink has dried, that all is good. And it's like, now we have to actually start building the relationship. The semantics are out of the way. And so I think the same with employees in that sense.
So we have context. You have 18 months to master that role. Now you're new in that position. You're working with Gary Vee. How does he correct you? Like, how do you look for correction, or how do you look for guidance inside of your role in a
Yeah.
way that's as fast paced as his?
Yeah. Incredibly radical candor and transparent, while also removing the personal aspect of it. I think a lot of people, struggle with feedback because they've built personal relationship, whereas you're actually doing a disservice if you're not willing to do that. And so, I've had incredibly candid conversations, and in that first 18 months, I mean, he was giving me incredibly stern feedback, and that's why a lot of times it was tough. And then I've turned to almost judging him versus realizing, again, like, these are his expectations, and the pressure he's putting on me is not to live up to them as a must, or I'm a bad person. I think a lot of people default into, you give me feedback and it's because you think I'm a bad person. It's actually, no, I want to give you feedback because I believe in you,
Right.
but the person receiving the feedback, just, it's so tough for them to, when someone critiques you, you don't say thank you. But if you actually listen to the critique and close that gap, you become better. So
Yeah.
you should be thanking that person. But it's just such not a human natural reaction. So, I mean, we text and speak on the phone every day. And the littlest things he is willing to over course correct, because then you realize, like, that it is all in the details and there's room to get better everywhere, every day. And if you're not addressing that, then what are you doing?
Yeah,
There's no time for mediocrity.
I've
You're
always
trying to really
wondered
go
about
for it.
that. I've always wondered about that from like your perspective, or somebody that works with Gary, because Gary is so incredibly blunt, right? When if
Yeah.
someone asks him a question, like I get, I have so many clips in my head of like a kid talking about his parents' expectations, and Gary just say, "Shut up," like.
Yeah, totally.
And I have to imagine that his feedback to you is similar to some degree.
It is. It is. It is through and through and through. And I think, again, to the point of, like, you've got to know the person that's giving you feedback. You've got to also understand. And I talk a lot about that. When you walk into a room of when you have a manager or a boss, if you can keep into perspective that that person is a human as well, and that in some pocket of their life they are getting feedback as well, it's a lot easier to digest, and it's a lot easier to put into a space of, like, they're not coming at me as a bad person, they're trying to make us all better. And so if you know Gary and the way that he is going to deliver that feedback, it's easier to be like, well, he's not being blunt for the nature of being blunt. A lot, that's how he communicates, that's how he does his thing. And then removing that, and then just focusing on what the actual feedback is. A lot of the way, obviously, he's incredibly charismatic and has entertainment value to his business. What I think makes him very special is he's able to deliver a lot of business advice in an entertaining way, which is a lot of what you see with the bluntness or the willing to speak, in not, hoity-toity terms, and wear a tight business tie and all that. And I think it allows for a lot of connectivity. But on the same front, when he's then delivering feedback, he doesn't change his demeanor in that sense. And so being able to understand that, but it was tough. Again, 18 months, like, we didn't know each other for a while. And so when I was trying, I would work till 2 a.m. and think everything was perfect. And then in his calendar, he had an 8:15 a.m. call, and I forgot to put the phone number in, and I would hear about it. And I'd be like, man, like, geez, like, here's the phone number. I text it to you, but, like, it's just like, no, I need it. That needs to be right. And if you're up till 2 a.m., like, well, then figure out, like, why it wasn't right if you were up to 2 a.m. And, like, I'm willing to help you. He's not scared of anything. There's a lot of, I've had Alex on my team now, but there's been over the course of 3.5 years, 4 other people that I've worked with either in partnership or I've managed, helping out as well. And that's from me being like, I need help. And his response would be like, okay, like, let's try it. And a lot of people, I think, don't go back that two-way communication in a lot of feedback. Or a lot of people that give feedback aren't willing to open the door for it to come right back to them in the same conversation, which I think is a not good way to deliver feedback either.
Yeah, I've written down my next question for you, which you kind of referenced. What does leverage look like for you? So obviously you reached a point where you're like, white flag, I need I need some help. There's only so much so many hours in the day. How does that, what's that partnership look like? But like, what's leverage look like for you? How does your job get better over time, and how do you find leverage in your role?
Yeah. So in terms of the partnership, meaning like, how am I just growing in the role and working with kind of the rest of my team in that sense?
No, more specifically, I'm saying as you get closer to mastery in your role, capacity obviously dwindles, right? There's only so much of you, and you are providing leverage for Gary. So inversely, what does leverage look like for you once you've reached capacity?
Yeah, I think there's one, understanding what is important and what's not. I think that like has helped a lot. And then you got to spend time to help other people understand what that is too. When Gary 5 years ago was taking 5-minute meetings, it was a lot more confusing for people, but he's now able to message that, and people, when they meet with him, understand what can be done in 5 minutes. So I think there's a lot of that. And I would say the resources around me have grown exponentially. And so as I learn more and more to be able to use them, that's how I'm trying to gain capacity me and Andy, and I reference Andy a lot because I work incredibly close with him. Once every other day, we look at each other and are like, get out of your own way. Get out of your own way. I think a lot of people spend a lot of time on needing to be the owner or the leader or have whatever project they're delivering stroke their ego, and we are very upfront about that. Oh, Gary's going to meet with Mark Cuban. I want to be the person to book that meeting. I want to get to know that person's assistant. I want to speak with Mark Cuban versus like, I'm busy. Alex, can you make that happen, please? Or whoever, versus like, oh, no, wait, like, don't worry about it. I'll do it tonight. And then you're up at 2 a.m. beating yourself over the head because you weren't willing to just get out of your own way. Because at the end of the day, what the task at hand is get the meeting set up and make sure that they get in their room. And if that's done, that's way better than anything else, and so I think there's a lot of that, if that answers your question at all.
Yeah. And obviously you do hire people. When you say focus on what's important, does that mean you're hiring someone to do the less important things?
No, I would say importance is relative. Back to like the mastery of where you're spending your time based on the value that you can bring. Okay. So what's important to me is different to someone else because of where I can be of value. If you take 2 people and put them to give the same task, if one person can deliver much more value, I would say that is more important to handle that than the other person. Whereas the other person can be of much value somewhere else. It's more important that they focus there. You can deem some things more important or less important in a organization, but from a task level, I would say that's kind of how I was referring to that, is because if you keep a perspective of Gary tweeted today, it's so funny. Gary literally tweeted today, and then we have a group text that everyone is on our team, 40 people. He tweeted, everything is the most important. And then he screenshotted it and sent it. And he's like, if you've been around, you know that this is the case. And I've learned to live my life like that. And that's how he does. Because if you want to stay on the cutting edge, on the forefront, and be willing to play offense at all times versus defense. Instagram goes down for a day, 9 people complain about it, 1 person figures out how to like use that to their benefit. Everything's the most important. Twitter's the most important. LinkedIn's the most important. Snapchat's the most important. This Skype's the most important. The 40 texts that I've got since I've been on it are the most important. You know, seeing my mom's the most important. Calling my cousin's the most important. Then it just becomes like, okay, now you got to prioritize and be willing to be on the offense about it and not complain that you can't get to everything because I decided to do this. So that's the case.
Yeah, I want to ask you a question about, so you're in your late 20s, right?
Yep.
Coming straight to Gary from out of college. What I find super interesting is that you don't find many people in their 20s that have the level of like self-awareness that I can see that you have already, and the ability to prioritize. And I listened to your podcast with Detailed Therapy with Amy.
Yeah, with Amy. Yep.
Yeah, and you mentioned in there several interesting things, one of which was that every interaction you have throughout the day, throughout the year, around the business is important. Every single little interaction with how you interact with the next person you're going to talk to, everything. And that is absolutely how I think and how I help Jesse run Pickett Street.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, where did you come into his business, into his life with that level of awareness? Did that come from, I know you had a big family, and I think so there were a lot of people, and being in the service industry, you get a level of empathy that some people don't have. I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, I think immediately the thing that goes into my head is that, and it's so fun, is it comes from my family, and it comes from that my father enjoyed talking to the ice cream man just as much as he enjoyed talking to the president of the United States. Like, just cold, like, without a question. He was as excited to speak with the dude that was driving down the street and could sell him an ice cream sandwich, because everyone has something interesting going on. And a lot of people get written off because of either their title or the way they look or the way they speak. But like deep down, everyone's got something. And what I've seen through Gary is a lot of people don't understand Gary because he spends a lot of time on things that other people would deem not important. But what I've seen and where I've learned, so that's what self-consciously has always been in me, and I think what led me to being so connected to Gary. I didn't know who Gary was the day I first started working here, but I think there's only one reason why over the course of 3.5 years, I'm able to still just like keep up with it, is because we think a lot in the same way. But he takes a lot of meetings that on paper don't make sense for someone that has such limited time, and I have seen time and time again it come full circle and make sense, and the same people that tell them it doesn't make sense go aha. And so now I've seen it from a business perspective, because in living life, I never, it was just a way of life to smile and say hey to the person that you were buying your bagel from and actually like engage with them versus just write them off as someone that's being of service to you. But in business, I've seen it really happen. I just got off the phone with someone that we just closed a business deal with them. And they closed the business deal with someone else in the business that I didn't even know they were having conversations about. But me and him just got to know each other and have stayed in touch. And there was a lot of times I was like, why am I even keeping this relationship? And then someone else comes to me and is like, oh yeah, we just closed this deal. I'm like, what? Like, from him? And so I pick up the phone, I call him, I'm like, what? Like, I didn't even know this is going on. And it just showed like that relationship that I kept with him for sure had an impact on that. And the person that closed the deal had no idea, and I had no idea. And
awesome.
so there's just, I think from a subconscious life, I learned it from my family. My dad was just through and through that way. And then I've seen it have pure business results.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things. So Jesse was the one to introduce me to Gary when I first, like, not maybe a year after I started, so like 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And what drew me to him immediately was just that the ROI of being kind and having empathy is absolutely how I operate and how my mom and dad taught me to operate. And I think there's something to be said there for when you're taught that from a young age, and how what kind of power that brings into a business is unbelievable. And for people that don't get it, it just blows my mind, because there's all sorts of connections you can make that can be helpful both personally and professional. So I just noticed that about how you spoke on that podcast and what you've said so far as well.
And we have this weird, not to get too like heady, but we have this weird concept of time in that the sense of 1 year seems so far away from now. But then when you're like, when that day comes 1 year from now, you're like, that feels like yesterday. But no one operates in remembering what it felt like after the year. They only operate in the way before, thinking ahead of what the year is. So they leave all of the ROI of actually building the relationship with someone when there's no value on the table. And they don't realize a year from now that person's going to have grown a year, have more other relationships themselves, and the network's just going to trickle. And the way you see it in business is promotions. Like people forget in business that just because one person doesn't like another person really might like them. And so you might think that they're not that good, but someone else might really think that they're good and give them a massive promotion or raise. And now all of a sudden that person's in an incredibly powerful role and you wrote them off. But if you gave them the time of day, now you're like, that person got that job? Oh, but guess what? We're best friends. When the 4 other people wrote them off, but all it took was that their manager thought they were great because they went to the same college or they liked the same pair of shoes, and you invested time in that relationship, and it comes back around.
Well, they remember those people that wrote them off too.
That's exactly right.
Different way.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And a lot of times they're louder about that person that wrote them off because that's how they beat their chest, and they tell 4 people about it. And then those 4 people walk into the first time that they meet with them of like, that one person told me you wrote them off, and now you have a bad judge on talent because that person's the CMO of this or that or whatever. Right. And you're like, So, and that's, seeing the good and the upside in everyone versus the alternative.
I'm excited to hear that you're speaking about this at the admin retreat, and you touched on it in that podcast, which is using your basis of hospitality in your role. It really clicked in me. It's funny, we talk about this relationship between like the executive and the admin all the time. And there is, some people mistake that the admin role is like subject to or less than in an executive role. When I love hearing you talk about it from a hospitality standpoint, because then it's all organic and it all makes sense.
That's exactly right.
I really haven't heard it explained that way before, which makes me sad, I guess. But
yeah, it's just fascinating. The people, if you go to Four Seasons or Ritz-Carlton, I mean, those brands are built on high service. But if you go to a diner, you immediately just know, like, if there's a staff that likes making you your grilled cheese and tomato soup and delivering it well and like enjoys that process and knows their place and what that can do for them, you can feel that in 2 seconds. So someone that actually loves being of service and like you're right, like the dynamic between the executive and the assistant, and a lot of times people think of belittling, but I think a lot of times that's the people that feel they're being belittled are almost putting themselves in that position themselves because they think of themselves that way.
Yeah.
Versus like, again, back to you're a human, I'm a human, you're just on a different path than I am, and I'm just going to be all in on this role and dominate it. I think that it makes it hard for other people to belittle you if you're like, yeah, I'm an admin.
Yeah, exactly.
I've been an assistant for the last 5 years of my life. Makes it hard for people to be like, you're an assistant? But if you're like, oh, I'm the assistant, which there's a lot to that, I think it creates just a whole new game that you can kind of play and be of service. Like when you have a waiter at a restaurant that you leave and you're just like, yeah, I want to tip that person 24%. Like that feels really good. But immediately when you have a waiter that has no interest in being of service to you, but they're still going to get the job done because they're getting paid. And I think that exists a lot in the role of an admin and the teachings of it and how it's placed in culture and put on a pedestal versus not.
I want to go back to the
Keep going.
random comment you made about how you forgot to put the phone number in the calendar invite.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering, are you naturally a detailed person, or did you have to develop all that? Like, because I know how detailed he probably is, and that
I
is
developed
like
it
natural to
totally.
some people. You what?
Developed it. I
Developed
developed it 100%. And
Okay.
and
Wow.
I would say this. I was just joking with my little sister about it. It hasn't transpired into my like personal life.
Okay. Yeah.
So like
I think on
I
the
don't.
podcast you mentioned that Gary is actually more detailed than you are. He's actually way more on top of his calendar and what he's doing than.
He is to a T, but outside of that, he's not at all. And so even a lot like logistics, I can do them cold for Gary, but I think a lot of times when it comes to me, you default back into it. So the detail aspect was completely almost out of like forced and like survival tactics, but it hasn't transpired. I'm not all of a sudden now an incredibly detail oriented person, and when I do have time away or time to myself, I'm not like I need to be gung ho. I can still be very, laid back, and I think that's how people would describe me. But when we're in the thick of things, like today at 3:30, like I'm P's and Q's and on it and on my game, and that happens. I'd imagine a lot and everywhere. Um, Whereas you have different aspects of your life, and you're a different person to different people, and you operate in a different way in different settings. You know.
I have a theory on that. You can tell me what you think. But I think that I don't think it takes highly detailed people to do highly detailed tasks. I think as long as it's supporting your objective, which is most important to you, like if you're whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, if that's the most important thing, like for us, it might be the client experience. If that's what I'm supporting, I can be extremely detailed in the pursuit of that. And
I
then
couldn't agree more.
and then in your like you said, in your personal life, that doesn't show up, right? Because you don't care about making your bed the same way that you care about making sure your top client feels loved and respected
Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree more. And something that pops into my head that is also fascinating is, like if you're under real pressure or survival, they talk about when uh, all of a sudden a tree falls on you, and to live, you got to lift the tree off you, and you could never lift that weight again in your entire life. But in order to save yourself, you can. Like, how do you bring that out in even a micro setting, right? So, like to your point of, yeah, when something needs to be accomplished, you can mold in and out of different strengths and tasks, and there's just a lot. You can keep going more and more heady of you only use 20% of your brain. How do you activate other aspects of it? Yeah, I think when you want to accomplish something, there's subconscious levels that can kick in that allow you to understand what you need to do to accomplish that. But they're not always on and always there. The level of focus, it's like procrastinating. You try to write a paper 4 days before it's due, and you for some reason are a bad writer. And then all of a sudden the paper's due, and you're like, well, you got to get it done or you're not going to get it done. And you're like, I'm Shakespeare. Like, this is easy.
Yeah,
I think.
I just told my team we have some things we're bumping up against, like hard and fast deadlines, and I'm like, I'm not worried. I'm chill. I've been freaking out for like 4 weeks, right? But now I'm chill because I don't have any choice but to perform. I don't have it's perform or die. So exactly I'm not worried. Let's do it.
Yep. So I have not many choices here.
So true.
Yeah.
So to think about what are you best at then? If details aren't your realm, obviously AJ and then Gary saw something in you they were like, yeah, I want you to be my assistant. What would you say is the number one strength or number two strength that you bring to that partnership?
Understanding human nature.
Okay. Yeah.
Understanding context of people. It's something I feel I learned that from being in a big family. And my dad was one of 9, I had I was a middle child. I had an older sister and a younger sister. Um, I had an interesting family dynamic. My mother came from an incredibly small family. My father came from an incredibly large family. What that dynamic creates, um, having to navigate, just understanding of people where I grew up. I went to one of the, my high school was incredibly diverse from both a racial and a wealth perspective. So you understand how to interact with a lot of different people. And so I believe my number one strength is understanding uh, humans, their ambitions, how they're thinking about things, and how they interact with people, and then just layer in context over that. What is what I would say. That and back to the point of why, like with, I believe I keep getting better by the day is because if I can keep adding more context and understanding as the company gets bigger and be able to just help like that web be told and understood. Um, that's I think there's a lot of good there, but it's not very quantifiable, right? So that
No, but
also
I think that's
leads to
actually a
some,
huge strength. I think it's a massive strength that not many people can do well. And I think it's
yeah.
when you can recognize that in someone in a company, that's like what they call the integrator oftentimes is the person who can talk between all the different channels. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What about processes and systems? This is a normal conversation or subjective conversation for us and our audience is like, anytime you want something to be scalable, you have to depend on processes and systems to get you there. How do you see that play out in your role with Gary?
I think the best process is to break your process. So I think when you get too comfortable in process, it becomes about the process and not about the output. And so what I've learned really from Gary at the utmost is just being absolutely comfortable in change and not being romantic to the way things were done. So keeping lists, whether you're using things or what calendar app you're using. To me, I operate my best once it's no longer stale. So I think processes are necessary, but I think processes are meant to be broken. And a lot of people struggle with the second part of that. I think people get comfortable in process and it allows them to be safe and something to lean on almost as a crutch. And I think the best stuff comes when the process is broken down and rethought about. And then not being scared to go back to the process that you just crapped all over and decided it doesn't work anymore. And then all of a sudden, a week later, you're back doing the same thing. That takes a lot of humility. Elon Musk, I think, he goes from in the span of 5 days, he's like, we don't do retail anymore. And then he's like, well, we're going to actually do a little bit of retail.
Yeah.
But here's what happened. The same person was like making comments or, sold off a bunch of stock. We need to be in retail. And then he changes back. And then he's probably like, no, you were actually probably right the first time. You were right. We shouldn't be in retail. It's just that you're always going to have comments on both sides, no matter what. And so I think you got to be humble to believe in process, humble enough to break the process. So essentially you're crapping on your own ideas, and then be humble enough to go back and say you were wrong about being wrong.
I have a thought about that. I just came up with this, so I don't trust it at all. But
I love it.
I can see Elon using Twitter and using these ideas as a process that's just accelerated over something that Bezos may have done with like the headquarters search. Like Bezos got so much information from all these cities,
data,
right? He did it, but Elon's like, how can I 10 plus that? Like, how can I get feedback faster, right? So he just like says stuff, people respond.
I believe in that theory big time.
All right. Okay.
Big time. It's all feedback loops. And I think that's people struggle with content and talking about content and media. They don't realize that marketing is feedback loops. When you put out a commercial, or, you know, and that's why social and digital has become so powerful, because it's instantaneous and direct feedback. But people haven't changed their thinking. When you put out an Instagram post and you press post, you're like, my content's up, but that's not the case. That's not the truth. You know, if someone comments on your post in 2 weeks, people are like, it's an old post. Like, that post is brand new for that person, and you need to respond, because that's a feedback loop. And if you don't, then they're going to be like, the next content, they're like, well, I don't need to engage, or he's not going to respond to me anyway, or this or that. Someone asked me yesterday about podcast, and they were like, what should I do? Should I go out and buy a bunch of equipment? And it's like, my advice is no, put out 4 podcasts first, because people just think podcasting is, we're going to sit here and record this, and then you're going to edit it and just press post. And they don't realize that then people are going to listen to it and give you feedback. And if you're not willing to listen to the feedback and adjust and communicate and engage with those people, like, that's your podcast too. It's not just the hour that you book on the calendar and want to have conversation. So then you do 5 of them, and you need to understand the exhaustive nature of that. And once you get over that hump, if you do the 6th, okay, we can talk. But then you can go out and buy a setup. But people get confused by the nature of, like, it's all data and it's all feedback loops, and the phone has just created it to be instantaneous, and we haven't even begun with what's going to happen with 5G and the amount of feedback loop and data that's going to come from that. And yeah, everyone just, it's just like back to the hiring an employee and writing them off 2 weeks in, or signing a client and just thinking you won because now they owe you money contractually, you know?
Well, we want to honor your time. I think we only probably have time for one more question. Margaret, do you have?
Yeah, I think so. I posted on Instagram and had a couple different people comment, and I thought one of my favorites was from Nate, who's one of the co-founders of Empathy. Yeah, so that was a great question. If you went back to day one as Gary's admin, what would you do different from the start?
What would I do different from the start? If I went back to day one and I was Gary's admin, what would I do different from the start? To be honest, I don't know what I would do much differently. I think that I would, because I'm trying to remove all the learnings that I've gotten, and they've all been so valuable. And the main one is, like, not take it too seriously. I think it took me a long time to understand that, and that he really taught me a lot of times I'd be stressed out or speak to him, and he'd be like, man, like, it's just business, or it's, you know, it's just another day in your life. But what would I do inherently differently? I don't know. Maybe try and habitually go to the gym more from early on, so it's not so hard to make the habit now. But, you know, from a time perspective, not much is my answer. It's not that fun, but the way it's played out to today, again, it was really tough. It was really, really tough for me. I mean, like, I spent nights crying, you know, over a lot of it. But it's only made me better. So not much.
Yeah, no, I like that answer. I think it's an honest, legit answer. And when people ask me the same thing, it's like, I don't know what I would do. Maybe dive faster, like go faster into things. But I think the way things play out or the way they
I think it's great. I think a lot of our audience can identify with nights crying.
Totally.
So I think that's great.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
solidarity.
My mom and dad, the amount of times that I called them, like, what am I doing with my life? Why? What is going on here? And then you get back to thinking about why and realizing you don't have to do it. You don't have to do it.
I really appreciated that thought from you about Gary, where he's setting the expectation, and that's the expectation for the role. And that role's not going to change, and those expectations aren't going to change. You're going to change or not, right? You accept it or you don't. It's not personal one way or the other, but this is what it is. Rise up if you want it. Step out if you don't.
Totally. And removing you're a bad human from it if you don't.
Right.
Because a lot of people, I think, harp on that.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Tyler. Appreciate it.
Thank you. This was fun.
We'll see you in a
couple
weeks.
Yeah. What's it? It's like 2.5 weeks, right?
Yeah.
Under 20 days.
Crazy.
And I'll hit you up and see what you want to do in Seattle, and I'll give you some suggestions. And
Amazing.
Yeah, he's a total foodie, so we know lots of good places to go to eat, and yeah,
Heck
there's a lot
yeah.
to do.
Cool. I'm excited.
all right,
Cool.
Can't wait. Thank you
time.
both so much. Yeah,
Have
this
a
is
good
cool.
day.
Talk soon.
Margaret, what a compelling and revealing interview you had with Tyler Schmitt.
It was striking.
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 I wanted to tell him.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, that's hilarious. Oh, that's just Tyler calling. It's just our buddy Tyler calling us back. Don't worry about it. Tyler, we'll call you back a little bit. No, I wanted to. This isn't all about me, and I have to remind myself sometimes, and that's so I did today.
What?
Because I wanted to gloat that Gary Vaynerchuk follows me on Twitter,
Oh yeah,
which
yeah.
is
That's
a
kind of a big
compliment.
deal.
It is a big deal.
Yeah.
And on Instagram, and I'm much better on Instagram than Twitter. But that's why I didn't mention it, is because then he'd research my Twitter and he'd be embarrassed. But yeah, my love of Gary Vee runs deep, and it's I've been a follower of his for a while, and this is something we talked about, like as far as 2 years ago, as far as having his assistant or getting an assistant of his to talk to us, and that day is realized today.
It is realized today.
So
I kind of forgot about that.
any thoughts?
Any thoughts? I have so many.
Post-interview thoughts?
Post-interview thoughts. Okay, so my number one takeaway from it actually was the similarities I see between him and I, which, that's selfish to think of myself, but I can't help, which is what helps when we go to this retreat and these admin have a chance to see his perspective. This is what this retreat is all about, is bringing perspective. His family background and empathy and awareness and ability to understand people and have a level of understanding, absolutely the same way I operate. So that was really cool. And to see that from a guy too, which you and I talked about a little bit, it's really different for me to see. I don't see a whole lot of admin in real estate that are men. There are some, but there aren't a lot. And so to see him operating at a massive level, and that a lot of people around Gary are guys, is interesting to me, that whole aspect of it. So I loved his level of understanding. He obviously is aware. He's only in his late 20s, so he's still got a lot, he's learned so much in a short amount of time working for Gary. I'm really intrigued to see where his career goes and what he does.
I think there's so much. I'm so excited for him to speak at your retreat for a couple of reasons. One of them is this. I want everyone to understand this. He had the opportunity to go from assistant to the CEO of VaynerMedia, AJ.
Yeah.
He had the opportunity to go from that to being one of the point men on their London expansion team. To being Gary's assistant. And he chose being Gary's assistant. That has to say something.
I mean, it does. It says a lot. And who wouldn't? I'm sorry.
No, there's people.
My gosh.
My point is that there are people that put a weight on the role.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And not on the opportunity.
Totally. It's such an opportunity.
That's the main message I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
There's people that instead of focusing on the opportunity, they focus on the role.
Oh my gosh, amen. That's what I've been talking about all this week. Thank you for bringing that up. Yes.
So let's focus on the opportunity. If we focus on the opportunity, who cares what the role is?
And I think that Tyler mentioned something, not in the same phrase, but he basically said, look at everything as an opportunity. Every interaction, every person you connect with, absolutely. And just as a side note, I don't even know if I should say this out loud.
No.
I was
Say
looking. So Gary John Bishop said he was okay if I had one of my family members or friends pick him up and drive him from the airport.
No. No.
So I didn't do that to him entirely, but I have to be cost effective with this retreat. And so I am renting a car and having somebody drive him. But I went through a couple people that I wanted to ask to see if they would be willing to do it. And if it were me, I would have jumped at the opportunity. Again, I see it as an opportunity. Other people don't. And I actually went through 4 or 5 people before I found someone who jumped at it. And I wanted someone who saw it as an opportunity, because to sit in the car with Gary John Bishop, even if he doesn't want to talk a whole lot on the way there, it's just like Tyler saw that opportunity with Gary. Sure, his life changed massively. As anybody who had any inkling of an idea of what Gary Vee is like and how intense his life is like, you've got to know that your life is going to change if you agree to work for him for 3 years, as Tyler did. So I think that outlook and mentality is absolutely what any human needs to do in order to achieve whatever they want to achieve in life. You have to start looking at things as opportunities and not as, oh my gosh, I got to do this, or
No, I love that he's the age that he is. He was presented with a huge opportunity, 2 huge opportunities. And I like that he said, as a matter, and he didn't say this, that it's a function of his age or anything else, but it's wise at that point in your life to be like, I have time to make a mistake. I have time to learn more.
Yeah.
I can, there's more for me to learn.
Yeah.
And so instead of like jumping at that London expansion, saying, you know what, I have the opportunity to learn under one of the brightest minds in the world. I'm going to stay in this lane for a little while.
Yep. No, I think he was super smart about that. And I think, I mean, he said he didn't really know anything about Gary when he first started. And then after he started working there for a while, obviously he knew enough that when Gary approached him and said, hey, you want to be my assistant? I mean, he knew just like, oh yeah, I got to say yes to that.
And it's so funny to me. You know, he, I think he said he books like 45 appointments a day for Gary, which is.
Yeah, he told us that 3-hour period, he had 15 appointments.
It's so insane. So, like, it's not about the role.
Yeah.
Like, if you have a problem with the role or you think it's less than, I'm sorry, you just don't have a clear understanding of what that is.
Yeah.
Maybe you have a picture of an assistant at an insurance agency in a one-horse town that, like, reads romantic novels.
Well, and if we want to go big picture about it, I mean, that is how the role is seen still a lot across industries. So a lot of it has to do with your leader. So Gary Vaynerchuk obviously knows who he wants to put around him and who he doesn't. I think in another podcast, the detail therapy one, he mentions that he doesn't even have a title. Tyler doesn't even have a title technically. So obviously you and people that we know that are good friends with that have great leaders, they know what an assistant should be treated like or how that partnership should be looked at. Yeah.
You want to know a few of my other thoughts?
Yeah.
I didn't get to ask
Why
him.
do I feel afraid right now?
Well, I didn't get to ask him this, but
okay.
I have this image now of like, I was kind of thinking, okay, who else besides Gary like sets up meetings this way, like every 5 minutes?
Oh, sure.
I'm trying to think. I couldn't think of anyone except for one person, one thing. And I thought of Game of Thrones. What? Because like if you're King Joffrey, you sit in the chair of swords or whatever, the throne of swords. And then the people, right, bring their issues before the king.
Yeah.
And then he says, off with your head, or give her 5 cows, or whatever the case. You know, do you know what I'm talking about? But that old style medieval system,
yes.
where the king is seated and the people are there, and he hears from the people. He makes decisions, and that's kind of how I saw Gary for a minute. Which is, to me, it's a hack. I like it as a hack. Like I have the idea now to like how I could set up an hour. You and I both could set up an hour each week where agents in the office bring questions to us and we just field them for the benefit of everybody for an hour.
Yeah.
And that deepens our relationship with those people.
We've thought about doing that before, actually. Yeah. No, I agree.
So that's one thought I had. I didn't think I should probably relate or compare Gary Vaynerchuk to King Joffrey. You may not understand that exactly, but King Joffrey was probably the worst villain in the movie.
Oh, perfect. So. Yeah.
I liked that he agreed with me at the end
about
my comparison between Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. Not that I need validation, I just obviously hit it out of the park on that one.
Hit it out of the park. It's a win-win. Well, obviously he keeps up with everything that not just Gary's operations, but he's obviously in line with what Gary thinks is vision, and they talk about all sorts of things.
That was a huge aha when he said all marketing is just a feedback loop.
Yeah.
That was a huge aha for me, and it just showed me everything's a feedback loop.
Totally.
So that when he mentioned Elon and how Elon will say, we're going to take all our retail stores out, and then he's like, oh, and then he gets a bunch of feedback, and then he goes, okay, we're gonna have some retail, and then he gets a bunch of feedback, and he gets to adjust, right?
Yeah.
And then I thought about Bezos and how I read this brilliant article about how Jeff Bezos did this HQ2 search, and it was kind of a weird data pool. It was just this big data pool to see what he could get governments and cities and municipalities to give up for Amazon. And so he learned about tax structures and tax incentives, and it was crazy how much information he got out of that.
Yeah.
And that was like a 3-month feedback loop,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I can just see Elon using Twitter as a 10x feedback loop.
Totally.
Does that mean Donald Trump's doing the same thing? I don't think it does.
I'm going to guess no.
I'm going to guess no.
Yeah. Yeah. But no, it did make me think like, wow, we should put out some test posts on social media.
I
and
know,
see
it
what
did
kind of
make me feel
feedback.
guilty for not being active on pretty much anything.
No, that was really interesting idea. I love that comment. Marketing is feedback loop.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, they're a marketing agency, right? So it's obvious
completely.
that they're focused on that.
Yeah.
And then everything that they do is just,
I mean, bringing content back to the teams about the latest shoes and fashion, all that stuff. Yeah, super interesting.
well, I was glad to have an interview. It's been a minute for us, and we're going to do 2 in a row.
Yeah.
Are we doing one next week?
We have Gary John Bishop on Thursday.
Oh, Gary John Bishop. Who's that?
Oh, the author of the book Unfuck Yourself.
Oh, my. Unbleep yourself, Margaret.
Unbleep yourself. Yeah, we're really excited about that one. He's actually going to be on the Today Show on Tuesday. And then our podcast on Thursday, which is totally on the same level.
Same
right?
level.
Same level. No, I'm thrilled to have him. I've just listened to him a little bit on YouTube and then read his book, of course. And he has an awesome way of looking at things. And he's totally going to just, I don't know, freak us out when he comes to the retreat. I'm sure he's going to just turn our minds inside out. It's going to be insane in a good way.
Well, thank you all for listening from the finer. Goodness gracious. Finally, I need to remember what our podcast is called.
Yeah.
From the Finally Click Studios in Bothell, Washington.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
Salute.
Have a great day.